Welcome to the Pool Builder Podcast, presented by River Pools, where we have one mission: to elevate the swimming pool industry. Real conversations with industry experts on topics that will help you become a more successful pool builder. So get ready to get your learning on. Now, here's your host, Jason Hughes.
Hello, everyone, and welcome to the first episode of the Pool Builder Podcast, where we'll have weekly interviews with industry professionals to help you become a better pool builder. In these short weekly interviews that you can subscribe to on YouTube, iTunes, or Stitcher, we will tackle such topics as pool design, landscaping, construction, sales, marketing, and sound business practices. Today, our guest is Skip Phillips. Skip lives in Escondido, California, and has been identified by Robb Report magazine as internationally the most influential pool designer, as the sole resource for innovative pool design on a global level by IQ magazine in Hamburg, Germany. And according to Aqua magazine, Skip Phillips is Mr. Vanishing Edge. Skip's the president of Questar Pools. His designs have garnered over 100 local and international design awards and have been profiled in dozens of publications, including the New York Times, Wall Street Journal, Millionaire Magazine, and Architectural Digest. Skip's also the co-founder of Genesis 3, which works to establish higher standards in water shape design and construction through education, certification, and establishing a network of like-minded water shape designers. Skip has also contributed greatly to the swimming pool industry through years of service in various trade industry positions, including serving as the president of NSPI in 1992. He has presented numerous courses and seminars around the globe on such topics as custom pool construction, advanced vanishing edge design, pool design in the natural environment, advanced hydraulics, and audible and visual considerations of water feature design. Skip has also served as an expert witness for the state of California, participating in excess of 300 cases, including jury trials, binding and non-binding arbitration, mediation, and administrative judge hearings. So welcome, Skip. Needless to say, it's an honor and a privilege to have you as our first guest on the Pool Builder Podcast.
Well, thank you, and I'm thrilled to be a part of it, and I love the fact that people in our industry like yourself are taking leadership roles. That's very cool. Thanks for including me.
Awesome. This is great. So why don't we start off by just getting to know a little bit more about yourself. How were you initially introduced to the pool industry?
Well, when I was growing up and working in high school, I worked in a firm that made precision measuring instruments for aerospace. So my background and my family's background really had nothing to do with the pool and spa industry. My father was a calibration technician on the Atlas missile guidance systems. I traveled all over the United States where there were SAC bases. I'm probably the only person you know that's actually been in an Atlas missile silo with an Atlas in it. But
You're right about
my
that.
father decided to branch out, and he purchased a pool supply store, unbeknownst to me. And then he asked me if I'd be willing to go clean my grandmother's pool, which I knew nothing about. I accomplished that, and then he let me know that he had purchased this company and would I be interested in being involved with that. So for somebody that's young and is tired of being in a temperature-controlled room, breathing lacquer thinner, being able to drive around with a pair of cutoffs and servicing pools seemed like a cool option. So that was 1975, and that business grew to be 3 real retail stores and 1,100 pools a week on pool service. I did repairs, and I learned that all from the bottom up. So my perception of vessels was much different than I think people that start out in the construction industry, because if you've ever had to service these, you would probably build them differently. And that was my initial experience with pools, and I got my contractor's license, built my first one in 1979. My second pool won a design award, which is certainly an indictment of the pool industry as opposed to an endorsement of me. I mean, how could anybody win a design award that knows nothing about design and really nothing about pools? But intuitively, I knew that was where I wanted to be, that it was a lot of fun.
Awesome. So looking back, from 1975 to today, was there a big break that helped catapult you up to the next level?
I think so. Keeping in mind at that time there were no educational programs even remotely resembling what we had in Genesis. So basically, you were learning as you went. And in I think it was 93 or 94, the Robb Report contacted me. They're based in Boston, and it's the Conspicuous Consumption Bible. And we were simultaneously, when they contacted me, they said, we're going to do this program called Club 21, and we're considering including swimming pools, but we're not sure because we find pools mundane and amateurish. But there's people on our staff that would like to include pools. So I wrote back and let them know that it's hard to imagine that they would include clothing designers because there's nothing more mundane than a pair of shoes or a pair of pants, and exclude pools. Mm-hmm. So possibly because of that conversation or because of that letter, they end up identifying us as being the most influential designer in the world in that component. But that wasn't the good news. The good news is who else was in Club 21. So they chose Ferrari for cars. They chose Gulfstream for jets. They chose Cartier for jewelry. They chose Giorgio Armani for clothing. So that was a big step. And what's interesting is those things have a tendency to feed on themselves. So that's, I think, how we were introduced to IQ magazine in Hamburg, the world's best in Canada. And simultaneously at that time, this is long before Genesis, Brian, who was on the national board with me in NSPI, was chiding me because I wasn't charging for pool designs. And, nobody charged for pool designs. And I told him that. I said, well, the market can't support it. And he goes, no, that's not true. He goes, you're doing cool stuff. You ought to try it. And so the decision that I wasn't going to do it that way anymore, that I was going to start charging for pool design, which also meant that I had to improve my work product to justify that. And like everybody else that's ever tried that, you missed the first three. If you would have played the game, you probably could have got them.
Yep.
And then finally, I ended up selling a $200 pool design, and then it built on itself. And then we raised our price and tried to throttle it with the economic thing because I was getting too busy. So I went to 400, 600, 800, 1,000, 1,200, and some really big projects came our way that required me to really reassess, intellectually, making sure that I could have the confidence, but actually have the background to back it up.
Yeah.
And so it made a big difference.
So the Robb Report really made you resonate, put you in a position to resonate with the high-end clientele. But backing up to that second pool where you won the design award, I mean, that just doesn't happen to most folks. What would you attribute that to? Do you have an innate? Are you just gifted when it comes to design? Did you put a lot of forethought into that particular project, or did you have help with it, or how did you pull that off?
Well, I didn't have any help with it, but I guess my perception of how these should go together was different. And going back to an interview I did just recently, I guess, where the Wall Street Journal, in fact, asked, well, what is it about your vessels that are different? We assume they're going to work different. We're assuming mechanically and structurally they'll be different, but why do they look different? And I thought about it, and I said, I think it's because I like the elevations low and the water levels high.
Yeah.
And that's the long and short of it. And that's not to imply that vanishing edges or slot overflows are to be used in every pool. That's not the point. The point was that thinking about the relationship between the water and the decks and how that influences reflectivity and how that changes the environment of being around the pool, I was thinking about that in the late 70s. I just didn't have any confidence to really put that into words. Same with the fire, food, and water premise of destinations. I kind of knew that made a difference, but I didn't have anything to base it on.
Yeah.
And so ultimately, our educational system really helped with that.
So you had a vision from the onset of what you felt like a vessel should look like, and two of those main components would be low elevations and high water levels. And yeah, taking some Genesis 3 classes before, I've certainly heard you share that before, and it's interesting that you had that vision from the onset. And you mentioned Vanishing Edge, so Aqua called you Mr. Vanishing Edge. How did you earn that title?
Well, I think earn it is the correct. I didn't give it to myself. That was a conclusion that they reached based on our exposure. But I think it's because we fixated on the details,
Okay.
and most we can debate. I think whether or not a lot of these vessels that utilize vanishing edges, whether that was the appropriate design tool. But where typically there was failures was mechanical. So nobody really thought out the relationship between the vanishing edge elevation and flow rates, as an example, or how turbulence would influence that, and how to protect against equalization, and whether or not there should be multiple systems or just a single system. And coming from the industry that I did, those were important components to me because I mean, there's only three parts of a pool. There's the design, there's the mechanical, and there's the structural. And any one of those three, if it's a failure, the entire project is a failure. So to turn out a vessel that has a vanishing edge and you can keep it full long enough to get a photo of it is not a success when mechanically it's purging 20,000 gallons a day into the neighbor's yard. So I think our fixation on those sorts of details are really what helped us earn that designation. But it also helped when it came to traveling internationally into some of these environments that had a much longer history of vanishing edges than the U.S. I mean, the U.S. is new. The first ones were done in France in the late 1800s. So, this is an old design tool. It's not a new one.
Mm-hmm. Great. So, with regards to Vanishing Edge, the technical details there, I know that Genesis 3 teaches some classes specifically around edge details, flow rates, hydraulics, and how to properly design it. So what is, just backing up a little bit on that theme, what is Genesis 3? How would you describe what it is, and how did it begin?
Well, going back to the 90s, we Brian and David and I over drinks in the Bahamas had created this concept of Genesis, not actually knowing what we were going to do with it. It was just an idea, and we didn't seem to look at the industry or the vessels the same way as everybody else. And then in an education meeting with the trade association, I brought up that what if we had educational programs where we actually brought in people that were experts in their field. We didn't rely on the pool industry. We brought in, engineers and architects and landscape architects, and maybe we had them in cool places, and we had decent food, and we had a lifestyle component. We weren't eating hot dogs at the airport in Chicago in the winter. Maybe it could be nicer than that. And the CEO of the industry at that time said that there was no market for that. And I said, you mean this is as good as it gets? This is never going to get any better? Well, what if I want to learn something like, I don't know, surge tank turbulence? What if I wanted to understand more about that? And he said, well, frankly, nobody cares what you want to learn about. I said, well, I find that interesting since half the people in this room are copying me and they're doing a pretty poor job of it. So he said, here's the deal. I think that this is important. And he challenged me. And he said, if you can get more than 20 people to pay and go to a class like that, I'll give you $100 a person. And I found that so offensive, I said, I'll take that bet. I said, and I'm out. And I stood up and left, but Brian was in the meeting as well. And I said, I'll do it myself. And Brian says, no, he won't do it himself. We'll do it together. So that's what founded Genesis. And we had our first class sold out in 90 days. We had a location, we had a curriculum. And actually, we hadn't thought it all the way out. We just thought we would do one class just to prove that this individual was wrong. And that Monday after the class, I think we had 18 or 20 of 22 students call up my office and say, okay, what's next? And I said, what do you mean? What's this next stuff? I never thought it out that far. But anyway, obviously there was a we, and we was much bigger than we ever anticipated, and it's developed from a couple of classes to the only third-party or ISET approved educational system on design and construction in the world, and then obviously connecting with the foundation, their system is also third-party or ISET approved. So it's been a good run, and I'm blessed to have been a part of it.
That's an amazing story, and there's a couple things I got out of that. One was that at River Pools here, we certainly try to think outside the box. We try to innovate, and every time we've tried to do that, we have been met with resistance. And it just seems to me that our industry is just so reluctant to change. And my question to you is, because you've traveled the world, you've worked with so many influential people, is that unique to the pool industry, or are we just a bunch of slugs?
Well, that's a valid question, but most industries are based on innovation. So I think I shared a brief story yesterday about that innovation, but it really reinforced the philosophy of Genesis, where I was doing a project for Alan Paulson, who was the CEO of Gulfstream, and Gulfstream, was at the top of their game. They had, I don't know, a big jet backlog, but they had serious competitors, so you had to innovate. So they had Lear, they had Bombardier, they had Dassault Falcon, they had Embraer, they had the Citation program, and all of them were working on these sometimes subtle differences to elevate their product. And these are serious players. I mean, these people really know what they're doing. And he, on a challenge, developed a plane and basically, I think, risked the business on it to develop a range that had a payload and a range that hadn't really been achieved before. And if he expended the funds and he did all that, and if it didn't meet the goals, then basically, he had a pink elephant and potentially risk his business. So he did the plane. It met the guidelines and continued to elevate Gulfstream to the top of their game. But I asked him that. I said, "How could you do that? How could you risk everything? You're already at the top." And he said words that I've taken with me ever since. He says, "Being the best is temporary. You have to continue to innovate, and if you're not innovating, somebody's catching you from behind and passing you up." And so he says, you really don't have a choice. And to your point, for some reason, not only does our industry not want to innovate or improve, they degrade innovation and they degrade improvements. And that's really a sad assessment, and probably why the people like yourself and a lot of people that are in the Genesis program, that's why we actually have a parallel industry, where there's people that believe in innovation and improvement. And the only philosophies we share with the balance of the industry is just that we're using water. The medium is water. That's the only component that we actually probably agree on.
So you mentioned parallel industry, and I've heard you use that term. I have a question for you, because the way that I see this program is this is your normal everyday pool builder. Well, it's the whole pool industry, but we're trying to speak to the people who are out there that aspire for more, but are maybe having a hard time breaking outside of the shell of our typical status quo. Is there a place in this parallel industry for the $40,000 to $100,000 pool builder?
I think good design is actually potentially less expensive than poor design. So if you have good construction techniques, and those are readily defined, your mechanical, your velocity standards, the 4,000 psi minimum compressive values for people that use concrete, those sorts of things should be a given.
Mm-hmm.
So then when it boils down to, does your vessel fail to meet normal, what I'll call normal design parameters, balance, proportion, scale, rhythm, texture, uh, does it fall within those guidelines? Because you may find that instead of throwing a dozen components you got on sale at the distributor at the pool, that maybe something much simpler is the answer. So, uh, and I think that people within our environment, I think, recognize that, and certainly the the client base, once exposed to that option, recognizes it. But if people that have been to our programs, and we suggest that if you run into questions or you run into problems, feel free to give us a call, and we'll try to help you out. And I actually got one of those calls from the Midwest where this fellow was trying to work with this couple, and he was having a hard time because of the resistance, not necessarily in the couple, but in the entire industry in his area, were degrading the innovations. And so he tells me what the conversation is, and he says, "You offered." He goes, "Now I want you to talk to him."
Yeah.
So he puts him on the phone, and I said, based on the conversation I'm hearing, these folks that are trying to convince you to degrade your own pool don't deserve a contract; they deserve a subpoena. So I feel like I'm watching this guy trying to save you from drowning, and you're punching him in the face at the same time.
Yeah.
I said, do yourself a favor and listen to this guy, and I don't have an economic dog in this fight.
Yeah.
And so there was a case where you had an entire industry in this guy's area that instead of embracing the opportunity to improve, they were trying to tear him down.
And that's not unique to the Midwest. It's really not, and it's a shame. But I feel like there has been a shift, or there is a shift occurring, and that's the next thing I wanted to ask you about. Is are you seeing that the Genesis 3 and is making an impact, and are you seeing a shift in how the typical pool builder is doing business?
I think the well, as you know, this is a big industry. Granted, it shrunk in '08 or during that time frame, but it's a big industry, and you can't be all things to all people. You have to pick, where you're going to fall. And like Alan Paulson said, there's always room for the best, and that's a small environment. The high road is the road less traveled, and if you just simply focus on that, I think that the rest will have a tendency to take care of itself.
Yeah. So last October, Genesis 3 combined with the National Swimming Pool Foundation. That was a big deal. So what brought that about, and what have you seen come from that so far?
Well, Brian and I recognize that we're getting older. I turned 64 in December. He's a few years older than me. There was two partners now, as opposed to three, and we didn't really have an exit plan, and we had a lot of people vested in our educational system. So the question that we posed to each other: how would we position Genesis to be able to ensure that the system that we have remains intact philosophically, and is able to ensure that the people vested in the program would know that for the long term that program would remain in place. And when we were talking to the foundation, in particular Tom Lachocki and Bruce Dunn, the chair of the foundation, it became readily apparent that philosophically we absolutely aligned with them, that we supplied an educational component that they weren't offering at that time. But the foundation is educating 25 or 30,000 people a year. It's not like they're new to the educational system. They just weren't doing our types of classes. So that merger finalized January 1, and I can honestly say that every single aspect of our involvement with the foundation, from Lauren, who is our liaison between the foundation and Genesis, their board, which I had an opportunity to sit in on, it's just been a privilege to be part of a group that believes so strongly in integrity. It's really been great, and I'm convinced that it was absolutely the right thing to do at the right time. And the good news is that Brian and I continue to have a contract to remain involved, and we're enjoying the role of ambassador, which is new for us. And like Brian says, we need what is it, diplomatic immunity sometimes. But it's been great, and
Awesome.
I think you'll see positive growth and solid leadership.
Well, you all have, with Genesis 3, created such a legacy. Um, and I don't say that lightly. When you mentioned earlier that when you started, it was a matter of learn as you went or learn as you go. And not that there weren't any educational offerings when I got into the pool business. I started when I was about 16, and we started our company, River Pools, when I was 21. But they were hard to come by, if anything at all was available. And so we made a lot of mistakes initially. And I'll tell you that we suffered for the first 5 years or so in business through just stupid mistakes, just from not knowing any better. But about our eighth or ninth year in business, I took the Genesis 3 construction school. And I will tell you that in those few days that I was there, and we're fiberglass pool builders. We're not even, we don't even build concrete gunite shells. I took so much away. I use much of what I learned to this day about just basics of construction, sound principles, and it was a real blessing for me, and it's blessed our company, it's blessed our customers. I'm so happy to hear that y'all are doing what you need to do to ensure that legacy is going to continue, and and it's a goal of mine to continue to take more courses and get some certifications. I'm looking forward to that because I'm finding that, and I think this is the case with everyone, the more you're around great people, and rub shoulders with the most influential players, the more that rubs off on you and has a positive influence. So on another topic, from a global standpoint, are you seeing what trends are you seeing in terms of pool design?
Well, there's kind of a fundamental difference, as an example, between Europe and North America. And we've had the opportunity to give classes at Riviera Pools in Germany. Had a contract for the prior 3 years, and who happens to be a fiberglass builder, by the way. And you go to their showroom, and you're just absolutely blown away. It's the nicest showroom I've ever seen any place in the world, and their vessels are killer, and that leads to this premise, I think, that Genesis is really only about concrete construction, and I really think that the more you learn about design, you realize that the surface material of the vessel is really not relevant. The color may be, but whether it's vinyl or fiberglass or stainless steel, that's really not the relevant part. And so certainly our construction classes have been lopsided in favor of concrete, but there was a reason why Riviera retained us, a fiberglass company, retained us to go multiple times to Germany. And between that and the class that I gave in Verona, Italy for Piscinogi, you realize that Europe is based on a wellness philosophy. So most of what they talk about is about exercise and lighting therapy and aromatherapy and water sanitizer. And even though Italy and Germany in particular are renowned for being international players in design, they were willing to defer to Genesis as it relates to vessel design. And they're good technicians. I mean, they're good. They're really good at what they do. And then here in America, it's really about outdoor living. So we have been fixated on that. Not that the wellness isn't important. It is, but we've really been involved in the outdoor living part. And then Canada is kind of the crossover. So Canada will be receptive to both the wellness premise as well as the outdoor design premise. So that's really what we see happening. And now with the foundation as an example, they have such a strong background on the wellness philosophy and all the statistics associated with that that we're expanding that role.
So I feel like I understand the wellness philosophy. Could you maybe elaborate a little more on outdoor living, with how that contrasts with wellness?
Well, there's no reason that they can operate simultaneously. I think it's really about the primary focus. So
Okay.
here in America, it's about creating outdoor rooms, as an example, where you've got different destinations and what drives people to these outdoor destinations. And it's not that you can't swim in it or you won't swim in it. It's that the majority of the time that you own one of these vessels, you're looking at it. So consequently, our design philosophy has lent it more to that, and we're concerned about reflective and audible qualities, which are absolutely valid.
Mm-hmm.
But so trying to marry those two components together, and hopefully, as an example, you get a chance to talk with Tom at the foundation, where we found that as an industry, we have similar challenges that some of the industries that we always felt were competitors of ours have, like the boating industry. Well, the fact is, if you can't swim, you probably aren't going to want a pool or a boat. So making sure that we address that and reinforce the benefits of exercise and obesity that's occurring. Well, you can still swim and have a killer design, but it also, there's these other components that are truly important that we haven't fixated on as much as Europe has.
Gotcha. So of all the work that you've accomplished professionally, we're just starting to wrap up here. Of all the work that you've accomplished, what are you most proud of?
I think the fact that I can have this conversation with you, the fact that you chose to contact us here at Questar and at Genesis, and that we've been had a positive influence on an industry to the point where you consider talking to us about that. So this conversation is indicative, I think, of what I'm proudest of.
Great. Thank you. Thank you for that. So, this program is really about where the rubber hits the pavement in terms of what practical advice can we give to the pool builders out there. So, what advice would you give to the aspiring pool builder out there who's listening to this interview?
Well, I'd reinforce what Alan Paulson talked to me about, which there's always room for the best, regardless of the economy. And so I would reinforce that being the best isn't just how you happen to market yourself. You actually have to be the best structurally, mechanically, and also from a design perspective. And I'd also suggest that what we need in this industry is the same thing we need nationally and internationally and politically, and that's principled leadership. And I think that being the best and being a principled leader, doing the right thing for the right reasons, having core values, I don't think, in spite of the twists and turns that we see socially all the time, I really don't think those things ever go away as being key components. And so that would probably be it. Because if you have the integrity component, the other components, work ethic and education and intellect and energy, those are great and can work with that, but you can't work with anything that doesn't have any integrity.
Yeah, amen to that. Yeah, we found in our company that despite all our gross mistakes over the years, that we've always tried our best to put integrity first, and we feel like that's what's pulled us through the tough times. So I can't agree with you more there. Well, Skip, it's so good to be able to have a conversation with you. You certainly, you're not only a trendsetter, but you see things, far in advance of what's coming down the road for our industry. You've got a great perspective, a helicopter view, a good pulse on things, and you've done so many wonderful things for our industry. It's been a true honor to have you. Really appreciate it, and thank you so much for that.
Thank you, Jason. It's been a privilege. Appreciate it.
So for the listeners out there, just so you know, you can subscribe to this podcast on YouTube, on Stitcher, and on iTunes, and there will be a blog post containing this episode with some show notes, so some highlights from the interview as well as any pertinent links or other information. And thanks again, Skip, and we look forward to seeing everyone in the next episode.
Thank you.